Hello everyone and welcome back on this series of videos on the Solow growth model. Today we are going to look at the variables that compose the Solow growth model and their explanation, why they take this form and how they are categorized. So let's begin by looking at a couple of fundamental assumptions that stay within the Solow model. First of all, we're looking at a closed economy. So we are looking at an economy where there is no international link, there is no trade, for example. And specifically, what this implies is that there are no imports or exports, and at the same time, there is no international capital flow. So it's basically an economy that is self subsistent, and it does not rely on any external source of revenue aside from what it produces within itself. Something else that is really important to state is that there is no government and no government impact, which basically implies that there is no government purchases or expenses, meaning that the government does not influence, for example, the the provision of public goods. There is no public goods. It's something that simply doesn't exist in this case. And it also means that the government cannot affect, like, for example, the savings decision. It cannot affect the interest rate. It cannot affect policies. So it cannot affect some parameters such as the saving rate. And this is just an example. Then moving on to the components of the Solow model, we're gonna differentiate them into two main categories. So we're gonna look at exogenous variables. And when I say exogenous, I mean variables that are determined outside of the model. So it's basically something that is not accounted for in the calculations, in the equations to derive the parameters of the model, but it's something that comes from the sky. That's how I like to say it usually. It comes from the sky, it comes from outside. It's not something that we can influence, it's just given to us. The first one is, of course, the factor input of labor together with the factor input of capital, as we've analyzed in the previous video. These are just the factor inputs that are given to us, but specifically here we have KT, which is capital today. So capital today is given to us, and we just plug it in and we just take it as given. An interesting factor here that is exogenous as well is this A that we usually call technology, or another way in which you've probably seen it is total factor productivity. Let's pause a minute to think about what this technology or total factor productivity really is. It identifies the proportion of output if, again, we recall the production function looks like something like this. So we have A that multiplies F of KT LT. And so this is the A that we're talking about. And what the fact that it's exogenous means that it just signifies the portion of output, so the portion of YT that cannot be accounted for by capital and labor, which are like the two inputs that are measurable, again, and they're given to us, so we do have a specific measure for them. However, everything in the output that cannot be accounted for by the interaction of capital and labor is going to be called as technology. And again, it's going to be exogenous for now. Moving on, we have the saving rate that, again, it's exogenous because, as we've said, there is no government, and hence the government cannot influence interest rate. Hence, it cannot influence savings decision. So again, it's going to be something that is given to us. And finally, our final important parameter here is the depreciation rate. The depreciation rate refers to basically the rate at which capital, Hence, let's say machines, they break or they become less productive because they're being used. Of course, whenever we use objects, so whenever we use, for example, a laptop, whenever we use anything really, it just loses value because the more something you use, the older it becomes, the less productive it becomes. So this is why we do need to account for the fact that capital, yes, is there, but it's going to depreciate. It's not going to be something constant. Then we are going to look at our endogenous variables as well. And now what exogenous means, it basically implies that we are looking at variables that are actually calculated within the model. So now it's not anything that is going to be given to us anymore, but it's something that we are going to look for. And of course, we are going to have our first endogenous variable, our variable of interest output. And output, as again, you can check the previous video to have more information regarding this, but it's going to be determined by the production function. So it's going to be determined by the interaction of capital and labor. Then we're going to have consumption. It's another very important variable that is going to become more relevant later on. And consumption is a part of our equation, and it is going to be determined as everything left after savings. And of course, then we're going to have savings and investment, these two main, let's say, as we are going to see, these are going to be quite crucial for the dynamics of our Solow growth model. Specifically, savings, they do depend on output. Again, we know that we have an exogenous saving rate, S, which is going to be multiplied by the endogenous level of output, which is why savings becomes endogenous, because it's going to be calculated within our model. And hence, since we are in a closed economy, we have no international trade, savings is going to equal investment. Here, I didn't say that this is savings, but hopefully everyone got that. Here we have a very interesting variable that we need to be very careful to, and I'm going to write it in red because again, it's going to become quite crucial as well for the definition of our model. And this is this kt plus 1. So kt plus 1 means capital in the next period. So in our exogenous variables, we saw kt, so capital today. And as we have capital today, we also need to check capital tomorrow. And we are going to see how it is determined. It's going to be determined by capital today, among other factors. But this is going to be the main component. And then, of course, we have the prices of the two levels of input. So we have the wage rate, and the rental rate of capital that are going to be important for when the basically the levels of capital and labor are given to us, and these are just defined as the prices of the inputs. In the following video, we're going to see how all of these endogenous variables are related to the exogenous variable and what can be done in order to pin down the main equations for determining our Solow model. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you in the next video.